Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, John Carvelli, allow me to welcome you to the California State Athletic Commission meeting of Tuesday, July 12, 2016. Meeting is taking place at the LA 84 Foundation on West Adams Boulevard in Los Angeles. After we do the roll call and pledge, I'm going to ask Dr. Williams to tell us about the foundation. So, Mr. Foster, now that I've called the meeting to order, I guess we'll do the pledge. Okay. Mr. Frierson, would you be kind enough to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? The flag is here in the corner, folks. Thank you, Commissioner Frierson, and welcome back. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
Mr. Foster, would you please call the roll, establish a quorum? Cesar asked me to remind everyone to speak clearly into the microphone as we are webcasting. Oops.
Chairman Corbelli.
Here.
Vice Chairman Lehman is absent today.
We can share.
Commissioner Frierson.
Here.
Commissioner Senior-Quidez.
Here.
Commissioner Souter is absent today. Dr. and Commissioner Williams.
Here.
Commissioner Ayala.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. Welcome to you, and welcome to Spencer Walker, our legal counsel. Welcome back. It's good to see you again. As far as opening remarks, I'm going to quickly turn this over to Dr. Williams again to talk about the foundation. I just wanted to say that it's been a great couple of months as far as CSAC in the news. I think if you've been following some of the news stories that Andy has diligently been keeping us all informed of, I think we've been in the news on ESPN and the LA Times, and all for good reasons. All with regard to the promotion of health and safety, the dehydration regulations, the success of the extension of the weigh-in and how that's been going. Of course, our comments about how we feel about professionals fighting in the Olympics against amateurs. And so I think that we've done if I do say so, a pretty good job of letting the public know where we stand for health and safety here in California. So, and well done on that, Andy. Thank you. Dr. Williams, would you mind telling us about this wonderful venue?
Sure. So, so we're meeting today at the LA 84 Foundation. I thought this would be a really interesting place and fun place for us to meet for a number of reasons. Commissioner Frierson was commenting on how much he enjoyed this venue as a meeting space for us today as well. A couple of things. The LA 84 Foundation was established with funds left over from the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles. And my understanding is that there were about $80 or $90 million of funds that were used to establish the foundation and endow the foundation. Since that time, in 1984, I believe the LA 84 Foundation has contributed hundreds of millions of dollars to youth sports. That's their primary mission, youth sports, health and safety in Southern California and Los Angeles. They provide coaching clinics for youth coaches. They provide funding for everything from money needed to sign up for youth sports to equipment for youth sports and that kind of thing for athletes across Southern California. They plan and provide a number of different projects and programs, everything from a velodrome program in Carson to a number of other coaching clinics and after-school programs in LAUSD schools or what have you. They provide grants for research having to do with youth sports, health and safety. They have a conference room that we're in now, and just adjacent to us is a library. And my understanding is that that library houses the largest collection of sports-related publications anywhere in the country. So it's a wonderful resource for those of us who are in and around Southern California. You can sign up for and use the library if you make an appointment and reservation. And then just across the courtyard from us is the Brit House, which was donated to LA 84 Foundation after the Olympics. This is a historic home. It was built in 1910. And that house has a number of really interesting artifacts in it, one of them being the Helms Trophy. And so if you have an opportunity, maybe not today, another visit back or what have you, to get a tour or schedule a tour of the house, there's some really great artifacts related to sports in that structure. There are great artifacts in the library. They have a number of replicas of torches from Olympic games over the years, medals, and then of course all of the publications and periodicals or what have you. So being so sports themed and related, being a foundation dedicated to health and safety, and that being a mission that has much overlap with what we do with Athletic Commission, I thought this would be a great place to meet and perhaps even spur the opportunity for us to work in some way with the LA 84 Foundation going forward.
Great, wonderful idea. I think we're happy to be here, and thanks to the folks at the LA 84 Foundation. I mentioned to please speak into the mic, and before we begin, let's see let's go to item number 3 then. So let's review and approve the April 25th, 2016 CSAC Commission meeting minutes. Mr. Foster.
Mr. Chairman, we have Commissioner Senior Quidez and Commissioner Mary Lehman and I worked on these revisions prior to the meeting, and I have several revisions. If it's okay, sir, I'll just start and read
Please.
them out.
Thank you.
Okay, on page 3, the camo, amateur mixed martial arts. Executive Officer Foster introduced Mr. J.T. Steele to the commissioners. Mr. Steele echoed the words from Mr. Frank and Mr. Fossum that they're doing their best work and collaborate together to improve communication. He stated that the 3 of them may meet later today to discuss further how they can all streamline the processes for their athletes. And then the beginning of the next paragraph, Mr. Steele also explained that camo, and then it goes straight into the current text you have, was having difficulty implementing the body caliper test. Then, Mr. Chairman, down at USA Boxing, still on page 3, amateur boxing, we added, after the first quarter of 2016, we added the words and gave a brief summary of their membership stats. Then, Mr. Chairman, under USFL Youth Pancration, Executive Officer Foster introduced Mr. John Frank to the commissioners. John Frank reported that the USFL had 2 co-events with camo in March 2016. They're still working on a platform that tracks injuries and is HIPAA compliant. They're working with the Andrews Institute, backed by Dr. James, and Andrews Institute of Education, a leading orthopedics youth sports foundation, a nonprofit, is trying to find a sponsor to pay for the platform. Commissioner Senior Quidez asked if Mr. Frank has provided the EO's USFL's financials. Mr. Frank responded that he did provide his financials to the executive officer. Vice Chairman Lehman asked how working with camo has been. Mr. Frank stated that it has been beneficial because the inspectors already have the experience, and there's also been consistency with the process for the kids that are turning 18 and moving on to camo. The promoters are also more professional. Okay. Then, sir, on page 4, under IKF, Executive Officer Foster introduced Mr. Fossum to the commissioners. Mr. Fossum reported that the IKF continues to regulate its events and that everything is going well.
On page 4.
Under IKF, amateur kickboxing, sir.
It's still on 3 for us.
Okay.
Okay. There it is. Okay.
Okay.
So we're still on page 3, Commissioner.
Commissioner Senior Quidez thanked Mr. Foster for working with the Commission on updating their website and providing the injury reports and financials to the Commission. Executive Officer Foster stated there is a large glory kickboxing event coming on May 13, 2016, and Mr. Foster is working closely with the Commission and the promoters on this event. This will be amateur and professional. Then, Mr. Chairman, down to the subcommittee updates. We added a sentence after and improving the Commission's profile. Then the next sentence says, Commissioner Senior Quidez also reported on the efforts of the Commission, including a potential International Neurological Conference on Neurological Issues in 2017 with a focus on concussive sports, which Commissioner Senior Quidez is working with Commissioner Dr. Williams. Also, Commissioner Senior Quidez.
What subcommittee update is that?
Large event, sir.
Okay.
Also, Commissioner Senior Quidez reported on efforts for an event, a gala with the Women's Boxing Hall of Fame, also in 2017. Then, Mr. Chairman, on officials training, after the first sentence, the sentence, however, there are some who have yet to begin, despite being notified more than once. EO Foster is to send out another notification since they have until the end of the fiscal year. Then the next paragraph, also, Commissioner Senior Quidez reported a test run of an evaluation system with Sports Board, which is used to evaluate officials by the NBA, Major League Baseball, and the Women's Soccer League. It was tested during the Andre Ward fight at the Oracle Center. Then on the instant replay report, her survey concluded that, with the exception of one person, all of those who were interviewed were in favor of instant replay. The commission discussed obstacles to implementation, which include how the assigned commission member will have access to the feed, as it would not be appropriate for the cable network to determine what replay for the arbiter to watch. After discussion, commissioners requested follow-up, which included more interviews with boxers and thoughts regarding how instant replay might advance California's commission efforts. And then one final change, sir, on agenda item 9, under public comment. Roy Engelbrecht asked if the test would be a requirement of licensure to replace the existing neurological test that is already required. The executive officer responded that this test will be an additional requirement of licensure. Will not be an additional requirement of licensure.
Not be.
Yeah, not be. So that concludes the changes that went over.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Foster. I need a motion to approve the minutes, please. As amended. Thank you.
I so move.
We have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a second. We have a motion from Commissioner Shenyakuta, a second from Commissioner Frierson. Commission discussion, please. Commissioners, do you have any further comments on the minutes? Seeing none, do we have any comments from the public at this time on the February meeting minutes? Seeing none, we will call for the vote. Please, Mr. Foster.
Chairman Carvelli.
Aye.
Commissioner Frierson.
Aye.
Commissioner Dr. Williams.
Aye.
Commissioner Senior Quidez.
Aye.
Commissioner Ayala.
Aye.
5-0, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. With regard to agenda item number 4, the folks that asked to be placed in this agenda item not here yet, so hopefully they will get here, and then we can make that presentation, and we'll see where we are. Before we move into executive officer's report, at noon we have an invitation for commissioners to take a quick tour by officials from LA 84 Foundation. So we'll walk outside, and also I have corner bakery sandwiches coming for everyone, because since there's not that many folks, we can all enjoy some corner bakery sandwiches. So that's coming. So you don't have to figure out for lunch.
We have
Yes.
to take a break at 11.
Oh, at 11, you need to take a restroom break, we'll call it. Okay. Mr. Foster, would you please provide your report to the commission?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to begin with the budget update. The commission's revenue for fiscal year 15-16, which just concluded on June 30th, has been very good. I'm going to give you the actuals, and then I'm going to give you the approximations for fiscal month 12, because they're not quite out yet, although I know what we deposited. Through 11 months of fiscal year 15-16, the commission deposited $1,665,107 in revenue, while spending $1,304,000. The commission's fund balance at that time had increased to $1,088,099, and should increase to over 1.2 million when the fiscal month 12 numbers are finalized. So I have in your packet a chart, and I can tell you the fiscal month 12 approximations. The commission's approximately deposited $253,000 in June, which pushed the commission revenue.
Which graphic are you referring to? Slide.
I'm looking at the revenue, and
This one?
yes, sir, it is.
Okay.
Yes,
So
sir.
we're looking at this.
So with the commission, with that last deposit, the commission's revenue has exceeded $1.9 million for.
Well, in your understated way, maybe you want to put that in perspective as far as perhaps 3 years ago when you started, and what that means to the commission, please.
Yes, sir. I have provided for the commission a fund condition statement that has the last 10 years. I could have went for the.
This one.
Yes, sir.
2 pages back this way.
And this was compiled by the budget office of DCA, and for fiscal year 15-16, the commission is going to end up depositing $1,916,000 while spending $1,474,000, which has increased the commission's surplus to $1,205,000, or the commission's fund balance. To give you a little bit of just taking some different numbers, the closest number in the last 10 years, and I would stress to the commissioners that these numbers jumped greatly during the year that I provided, because mixed martial arts was legalized during this time. So this includes all of mixed martial arts. The numbers were much, much lower than this before, so I didn't think it was relevant to pick those numbers. This is an apples to apples comparison. If you look at the next highest, which was in 2008-9, the commission at that year deposited $1,868,000 while spending $1,862,000. So it was a surplus of $8,000, or $6,000 rather. Fiscal year 11-12, I was the commission's revenue was $1,386,000 while it's spending $1,855,000. That pushed the commission's fund balance down to $23,000. But we're in better shape now.
Master of the understatement. I'd call that a corporate turnaround at the highest level. And congratulations on that.
Thank you, sir. I've provided it graphically over the last 10 years, if you'd like to see. And the green represents the fund condition. Yes, sir. And the blue represents revenue, while the red represents expenditures. In a perfect world, these would be probably in equilibrium.
We're running a surplus. We have a huge fund balance, and by all measures, this is a healthy financial picture for the Athletic Commission, perhaps the healthiest in history.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the healthiest in as far as the numbers go back from the department.
In modern history.
In modern history, yes. So, having said that, I don't want to belabor this point too long, but I do want to bring this up to the commissioners because it is relevant concerning the budget. I had a difficult time making this budget work this year. And we're going to be working on some steps, and you'll be presented with some different things in the future that maybe will remedy this situation. The commission is making money on most of the events that it regulates now. So when we have event requests come in, we as the commission want, I and staff, we want to regulate these events. This is something that we want to do. It's good for the industry. It's good for everything. So having said that, we're going to be taking steps, and we did get a BCP for our drug testing this year. But we need to have a mechanism in place so that the 3 line items that are directly related to events, inspectors, travel, and drug testing, are able to be somewhat supplemented if we have an increased amount of business that comes into the commission. Now, I'm talking with the budget office about various things that we can do, how we can do this. But I just wanted to make the commissioners aware that pulling in $1.9 million in revenue with $1.4 million in expenditures is we should technically be kind of in an equilibrium type base, and I think that picture illustrates the difference between our very fluid revenue structure of revenue streams, because 85% of the commission's revenue comes from the events themselves, from the gate taxes, and not from the licensing. And I did want to bring that up in a public meeting, that was a, and look, it wasn't just, I worked with the budget office day in, day out on this in the entire three months. So.
Andy, any chance we can be more participatory in our own budget determination going forward?
Well, I spoke to the chairman, and I think in the future, in the fall, in the Sacramento meeting, perhaps that may be an agenda item coming. In the budget office will come and actually have a work group with the commission during a public meeting.
So yes. Can you quickly maybe update the commissioners on our spending authority? Maybe over the past 3 years now, that's moved.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Here we go. Well done.
So in fiscal year 11-12, the commission had approximately $1.85 million in expenditure authority. Then, for all intents and purposes, the commission had some really hard times, and it ran out of money. So there was a solvency plan established, and the commission's authority was still at about $1.9 million that next year, but it was determined that it would only spend like $1.3 million. So that's what happened with 12-13, and then the actual budget change proposal, the negative budget change proposal occurred, and our spending authority was cut roughly 40% down to $1,194,000. Now, during that year, Chairman Carvelli and I worked very closely with the DCA budget office and DCA, and we got through that year. Then we moved up to close to $1.4 million, and then this past year we were at $1,474,000. And next year it's going to be like $1,660,000 or $670,000, somewhere in that range. Some of that is because Central Pro Rata came back, but we did get about $100,000 in. Maybe a little bit more than $100,000 for drug testing and additional adjudication of drug testing cases. So we're moving back up, but we're still far away from historical norms of where our appropriation levels has been historically.
That'll be part of the discussion at the next meeting with the DCA budget folks.
That's correct, sir.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, sir, if there's no questions, I'll conclude that particular report. This is the Neurological Fund budget update. Again, there's roughly approximately $620,000 in the account, $621,000 in the Nero Fund account. But that's the overall fund. What I thought was important was to show the commissioners the last 5 years of revenue and expenditures for the Nero Fund. And the reason I thought this was relevant to show is because we're going to begin to spend this money. we're working very closely with the Department of Technology and the agency to have the C3 Logics program approved. We answered a few additional questions yesterday that they had, but that process is in motion and it's moving quite quickly for California state government. We're moving it along. So I thought it was somewhat. I thought it was important for the commissioners to actually see what was spent over the last few years out of this fund, and just kind of give you a breakdown. And that's where the money has went. That's where the money's at. And our appropriation for next year is a 61. Oh, it's this year now. This year, current appropriation is 61,000. So once we get this approved, it's my hope that we spend 50 of that 61,000 on the C3 Logics purchase of that year. We'll have to have more the next year because our appropriation. But we're also running a budget change proposal at the same time to help us with that for the Nero fund. The 61,000 is our appropriation. 9,000 of that is for pro rata. So I gave $2,000 just as a cushion. So 50 for the contract, 9 for the pro rata, and we should have 2 left over unless we have to spend it on something, which most likely we will. Something.
I have a question.
Yes.
The CNP services.
Yeah.
I noticed there's been an appropriation every year over the last 5 years, but no actual expenditures. Is that what you were referring to earlier, or what is that?
That's a contract that we have with various. That's the budget for the contract. Okay, so we don't really have like an active contract that we're engaging in, but that's the budget for it because they know that we're going to have to contract with somebody to provide neurological services. Does that make sense?
It does, but we haven't actually spent the money.
That's correct.
Okay.
But to remind the commissioners, the challenge with the Neuro fund is that we have been able to make expenditures, so that we fixed that this year as a commission. Finally,
And I think
welcome to government accounting, Commissioner Ayala.
and I yeah.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, if there's no other questions on the Nero, what I can just tell the commissioners is we are actively engaged in this contract, and I anticipate at the next commission meeting being able to come back to this commission and saying we're really close or it's done. So,
It's done would be good.
yeah. Okay, sir. If there's no questions, we'll go to the pension. So I wanted to talk about the distributions in the pension account for a moment before we get into the actual fund balance. Commissioner Frierson is there, and this was one of the things when he hired me. He said, "Look, this is a big priority. This is what we want done," and you can see that we've made progress through the distributions through the chart. But Chairman Carvelli made it a priority that we want more. We want this done more. We want more of this. So he formed the subcommittee with Commissioner Mary Lehman and Commissioner Ayala, and we developed an action plan. And I'll be talking about that in a little while, but the action plan's having some good effects. And you can see that through June of 2016, this is only halfway through the year, we're at a very good level of distributions. And should this continue or even partially continue, we'll set a record year for modern history of the pension fund distributions. Just I wanted to give the commissioners update that the distributions of the pension fund is going well.
You're going to give another update during the subcommittee update, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great.
And then the investment account, which is where the bulk of the pension money resides, This is as of May 31st. These statements run a month behind.
So this is pre-Brexit.
Yeah, this is pre-Brexit. So the ending balance in the account was $5,216,297. So I will let the commissioners know that I had to request an additional $150,000 from this account to move to the distribution account because of we've had an increase in distributions. So that concludes my pension update on the fund, unless anybody has any questions.
When we have our next meeting in Sacramento, can we have these people come and talk to us about the allocations?
Absolutely. Cyril Shaw has made it. He's actually called and asked about that. So. Sorry, I got my book backwards. Okay, this is the, now we're on the rulemaking regulations, rulemaking tracking sheet. That's correct, yes, sir. The therapeutic use exemption transgender regulation has now, is now at the Department of Finance. It's actually been approved by agency. Okay, so it's, yeah. So the Department of Finance step, especially since this has no fiscal impact, really should be very quick. So I should have a report, an update for you next week. I'd say at the latest. That it's been submitted to OAL, and then OAL sometimes has questions, and I'm sure that they will with this particular regulation. Okay. Then the examination of boxers' applicants and neurological assessment. That is at the legal counsel. Gary's reviewing that. Payment to contestants. Gary's reviewing that. The emergency headgear has been done. It's completed. Okay, but because it's an emergency, you guys are going to see it again soon.
Commissioner Lehman sent me a question for Spencer about whether or not this is too vague, is her question. That's an open-ended question. We might not be able to okay, all right. Well, since you're filling in and Gary's not here, then we'll have to get back to her on that one.
Weighing time, time for physical examinations and dehydration and rehydration that the chairman mentioned a bit earlier, which I would say is probably one of the more, probably the best regulation this commission has done, and at least as far as direct impact and quick impact for contestants and seeing that they're safer and seeing that they're healthier has been completed. It was an emergency package. And it will come back, and you guys will see it again. Actually, you won't see it again soon because we don't have any changes to the language. OAL took the language, so it'll be going through the rulemaking process.
This is also going to the ABC, right?
That's correct. Then you see the headgear. This is what the commissioners will be voting on in a little while. So it's not. That's why it's in total red. And then you see the dehydration regulation. It's in its regular rulemaking process now. So that concludes my regulation update. I will now move, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, to the delegation, to the delegated entities. I will start with the two entities that were not able to attend today. Mike Martino from USA Boxing has personal family issues. He can't attend. And Mr. Fostum very much would like to have been here, but he is running an extremely large event in Florida. And USA Boxing, since the last since the second quarter, they've done 52 events with 800 bouts. There were no injuries, and there were ambulances at each of the events that they regulated. Mr. Martino wanted to make the commission aware that Los Angeles, that the United States Olympic Committee has submitted Los Angeles as a bid city to host the 2024 Summer Olympic Games. So he's hopeful that that might come to pass. And then for IKF's update, from January 1st to June 30th, IKF's regulated 30 kickboxing events, amateur kickboxing events in California. I might take a moment to point this out. This is a tremendous increase in kickboxing activity in California. I mean, it's a sharp increase. I don't have the exact number, but I'm sure that it's not 30 that we did all when the commission was doing it the last year. Yeah, it was a very small number. So this is a good increase, and I actually attended one of these since the last time with Mr. Fossum, and I can say I was very impressed. The young amateurs were very well protected. They had the headgear. The ambulance was present. All the medical precautions, and the referee stopped the bouts quite early. I thought, especially it was very consistent for amateurs. I hadn't been to an amateur show in a while, and I was a little shocked to see just how quick they stopped these things. So that's what I noticed. And then, Mr. Chairman, we have here present Mr. Frank from USFL and JT Steele from Camo. Mr. Frank, you want to?
Gentlemen, you want to come up and sit at the witness table there? Just introduce yourselves for the record, please.
Good morning. Caesar, we good? All right. JT Steele for the record, president of Camo.
John Frank, president of USFL.
Welcome, gentlemen.
It's great to be here.
Andy, do you want them just to give a...
JT was going to talk about, Mr. Steele was going to talk about his female tournament.
Come on, let us know.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
As you know and you're aware, females in combative sports have always been a little bit underrepresented, and we've been trying to work with them to engender that community more. So we started the first state championship for female fighters this year. It was recently completed. It was a success, and the concept behind it is to build a structure for them. The theory of if you build it, they will come, and to try to put some state titles out. We're the first state in history to do that, to make an official state title, and it was well received. Some of the brightest stars in female MMA came out and supported the show. Chris Cyborg and Victa all came down to watch these female athletes, and including quite a few females who weren't in the state championship but came from other states just to fight on that card for that type of exposure and for that opportunity. It was a great success, and I hope that it'll continue to help foster the female community. So we're really happy and pleased with that.
We appreciate when you help foster. Thank you.
Also, as an update with the minimum weight standard, we've actually we talked a little bit about the scale prices at the last meeting. We've actually found a vendor and worked with them and are able to get those scale prices from where they were about $1,300, $1,400 to factory refurbished models for about $800 to $900. So I think we're going to be able to move forward, purchase those scales. As long as that is the direction that the commission still wants us to proceed, we have a financially feasible model to do so at this time. One thing I would like is a little bit of direction, either coming from the commission or from the executive officer, is it appears that the trend in MMA right now, starting here in California, now being adopted in Nevada, is the earlier weigh-ins. We have always successfully had day of weigh-ins, with some exceptions in amateur mixed martial arts. If we are moving as an industry to earlier weigh-ins as a safety precaution, although we haven't had any incidents, and it has served us very well as a way to discourage weight cutting. If that is the same path that you wish to see take place in the amateurs, we would obviously consider that. But I'll wait for your direction if that's the way that you would like us to go. Andy, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I think we can talk about this, but my thoughts are, is we inherited a system for professionals that was broken. Okay, and we've been part of it. It's my understanding the amateur system, from everybody I've spoken to, doesn't experience this drastic amount of cuts yet.
Correct.
Yet is the key word. So I think we need to monitor it, but my focus would be, if you establish the minimum weight standards on these amateur athletes and they have a number that tracks them around, then that's doing close to the same thing in my view. I'm sure I understand and I know how you could game that, but I'm not sure an amateur with 1 or 2 fights is going to actively try to do that.
Or has the desire to do that at all. Okay.
The other thing is you don't really have that TV, part of it is that TV. So they want to do the weigh-in the day before, so they have the whole TV thing, which you don't in the amateur. So that doesn't affect you, right?
Yeah, it is. It is significant with a professional event. So I would submit to you that in amateur right now, the status quo is working. But if that is something that we need to change in the future, we can do that. But we will move towards the minimum weight standard. We can add. We were obviously adding that to our program at this time.
Well, thanks for bringing it up, and you'll keep us informed. I know.
I will.
Thank you, sir.
I've got a comment question on that though. I remember a few months ago, and I can't remember the name of the fighter now, but he fought on the UFC card just this past weekend, former champ Hendricks. So there was a big article maybe a few months back on his weight cutting trends and how he's trying to change that for the better for his health. And he actually mentioned that this is kind of these weight cutting strategies, if you will, don't start when they get to the professional level. That in fact he's been doing this since he was wrestling in high school. So I just wonder if you mentioned that you don't really see that as a trend within the mixed martial arts at the amateur level or what have you. So I just wonder, is there a way to actually track that? Because some of the professionals like Hendricks are saying that this is in fact a trend that starts way much earlier in their career, as opposed to when they're professionals in front of national televised sports. So, that's just something I want to bring up, because here you have a professional that's like, or was the face for UFC for a bit here, or one of the faces that is saying this. And so I think it would be the responsible thing to look into whether or not we want to set those standards earlier on in these fighters' careers.
I think that's a really good question. And
right.
In the wrestling culture, I think that's always been a big problem. And when they had those 4 deaths at Cornell University in the 90s, I think it was, they started to really monitor that and set standards for that. In the MMA industry, like Andy said and JT said, we are setting the minimum weight standards early. This is a very, very new sport. And so we're catching it much earlier. Whereas in the wrestling industry, in the amateur industry, it went on for a very long time before they caught it. So I think there's a big difference.
I agree with you because we'd be the first commission to implement this standard, albeit just in the amateur program right now. But I'm not necessarily, and I know what you mean because we're the first one, but we are, 20 years late to the party.
Yeah.
I mean, wrestling's been doing this a long time. And look, your question's absolutely, it's perfect. And, he missed weight again this weekend. Did you know that? He missed weight again. And you're right. I think the thing we need to do is study it and look at it and actively look at it, not talk about it and then actively look at this, because if the fighters start to do this, then it could be detrimental with the same day weigh-in, because they're going in just totally smack dehydrated. Okay. Now, one of the things that I thought would be helpful to add to JT's program, I was going to talk to him about it, but if you're going to run same-day weigh-ins, at least use the specific gravity strips to test their urine. Make sure that they're hydrated going into the cage. And those are incredibly inexpensive, like 2 cents a stick or something. Because my concern is that you have all these fighters. You have 24 fighters on the card. You have 23 of them that are absolutely fine, and one guy came from amateur wrestling, like you're referring to, and has just left the sauna, come to step on the scale. Just my thoughts. But the temperature and all that stuff, then that's being talked about. We talked about it at the MAC last time. But this all goes hand in hand with that minimum weight standard. If you set a weight where these fighters can't go below, perhaps they get fat or something, and it's hard for them to cut down. But that's unlikely for an athlete who's competing in mixed martial arts. Not impossible. It's unlikely. But no, it's a great question.
So just to clarify, though, so currently, if you're a professional athlete in mixed martial arts, you're weighing in the day before, right?
That's
it used
correct.
to be the evening before the fight.
That's correct.
Now it's earlier in the day.
That's correct.
And that's to prevent all this up. So, but with the amateurs, it's day of. So it's the morning of the event.
It can be the morning of. It can be 4 hours before the event. It doesn't. It's different each event.
And I would imagine a lot of these folks that start at the amateur level eventually move up. I don't know what the percentage is or what have you.
A lot of them, though.
A lot of them do.
Mm-hmm.
So my only point here is that wouldn't it be good to kind of start the standard earlier on? And I know that you make a point of, we don't really have much of an issue right now with weight cutting. But if you start the standard earlier on in their careers, wouldn't it just be more of a natural thing as they progress to the professional? And the weigh-in is the day before? Or?
I tend to agree with you, sir.
Well, because here's JT offering something, and yet we're kind of saying, well, we don't really need it right now.
To me, it's kind of an issue of these people, a lot of them, unlike the professionals, they have jobs, they work.
Right.
And it's kind of cumbersome for them to take the day off, and they're not professional fighters.
Okay.
So you're requiring them to then take an extra day off to go to a weigh-in, so that makes it very tough. You know what I mean? So I think that's kind of the issue.
It is it can be very cumbersome. So it's kind of a push and a pull. I know we probably will not come to a resolution on this right now. I just thought it would be a good talking point for us to begin to consider, and as we watch these minimum weight tests that we are going to do as they come in, to decide long term what we'll do. But we should probably start thinking about what does the long term look like for amateur MMA in the future. And I think Andy's doing a wonderful job of that, and this is probably the right step. But it is the time to think about what the future does look like.
Mr. Chairman, I would just point out that it's my understanding from talking with the people in the industry that every scheduled fight that's on the calendar, I'm talking about the big fights, every scheduled big fight, UFC and Bellator that I know of, the commissions have adopted the early weigh-in.
I just have one other thing,
For
Jake.
amateurs?
No, for pros, for the big
Oh,
fives.
okay, yeah,
I was sent a lot of photos after the state finals, and one of the kids, Jasmine,
Yes.
they don't have a gym. They're training in the park. There's a lot of that. Maybe it would be a good idea to help them write for a grant for LA 84 Foundation.
That would be a great idea. Some of these fighters don't have the background that they have had that we envision for them, like Jasmine Pouncey, who's a tremendous athlete, up and coming fighter, won the state championship, trains in the park with her dad, who's her coach, right? So that's a great point. Is there anything else that I can appraise the commission on today?
I feel very strongly. No. Okay. Well, thank you, JT.
You're very welcome.
Obviously, we're interested in this, Mr. Foster, Mr. Steele. So if you would keep us, let's track this, keep an eye on it, maybe make some further recommendations. Certainly, we'll bring it up again at our next meeting. And if it needs to be an action item, let us know. So
Yes,
that's a good discussion. Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Frank?
Yeah, John Frank from the United States Fight League. Since our last commission meeting, we've had one event, which was on May 14th in San Bernardino, 14 bouts. We didn't have any injuries at that event. And we have one scheduled for this weekend and two more for August, one in Northern Cal, one in Southern Cal. Updating on the industry, the Andrews Research and Educational Foundation injury study. They still haven't had any luck with the platform. They've contacted a lot of the industry leaders in martial arts, but they're looking at maybe just coming up with money on their own for a platform to better get the results or the injury reports. An update, they had about 500 exposures that they have right now. Generally, when I was told, and I spoke to Dr. John Rodriguez, who's heading the study, they generally wait for 1,000 exposures, as in football and other high school sports, before they publish something. But they're exploring if it's possible to give something a preliminary result, because it's pretty slow getting the numbers in the sport, since we're limited to California. We've also been approved in Missouri, but they haven't had any bouts yet. So they're working on that as we speak. I spoke to them this morning. So something may come out, or they just may wait till they get about 1,000 exposures for the sport. That's about all I have. If you have any questions.
If we can help as a commission, encourage them to give you maybe make it 100 athletes or something, let Andy know, and maybe we can throw some support behind that. Where is the event in Orange County on July 17th?
It's going to be at the OC Fairgrounds. It's a joint Camo USFL event. I think we have 5 bouts scheduled.
Okay, so that's Sunday then, right? Is that Sunday? Saturday event?
Okay, Sunday.
Sunday. Okay. I think I'm going to be there. See you there. Thank you, Mr. Frank. Mr. Foster, I think you're up to Neuro conference.
Yes, sir. I'll just give a brief update. I just attended on Friday the American Academy of Neurology conference with Dr. Williams. And I spoke to the doctors about combat sports, matchmaking, patterns in matchmaking, and really issues and items that I thought that if you're a neurologist, or you're the licensing or treating physician, or if you're a ringside physician, some things that you might want to know about the athlete. Dr. Williams?
Yeah, I would just say, as Andy mentioned, we had a National Sports Concussion Conference. This was the third conference we've held, sponsored by the American Academy of Neurology, and we had breakout sessions on high school sports, collegiate sports, professional sports. This year, a focus of the conference was on combat sports, and Dr. Tony Alessi, who's commissioner in Connecticut, and I talked about inviting our executive officer. And I just got to say, I think it went extremely well. So Andy, as he mentioned, talked about a number of things. Some of it had to do with matchmaking. Some of it had to do with safety in general. But the perspective from someone of his stature with his experience was something I think was invaluable to the attendees. And understand, normally we're hearing from physicians and speaking to physicians and psychiatrists and psychologists and trainers and therapists or what have you. But I think Andy brought a perspective that was very much appreciated. I got lots and lots of positive feedback from attendees, even people who hadn't attended but had heard about it. And a lot of the comments you made, you weren't there 2 days later, no, the next day, but there was a plenary session meeting on combat sports, and probably 6 times during that 1 hour presentation, Dr. Alessi referenced something that Andy had mentioned during his session. So it was a great event, and I think that he represented California just like we would expect and have come to know. And so I was really proud to be a commissioner and work with him, and I think it was a great event. So thanks a lot, Andy. It was great.
Chairman, now we'll just move on to the upcoming event schedule. Just wanted to point out just a few events that the commissioners may want to attend. There's an event in your schedule, in your calendar, in September that I'm not going to mention because it's not been publicly announced yet. And they asked that I.
You just mentioned it.
Well, I did. I had to say which one. On 7:30, the commission has a show at Fantasy Springs, HBO on HBO Latino. Golden Boy Robert Diaz and I are going over the matches on that one. On the 6th of August.
We don't have that page, or I don't have that page, the July
in
page.
September.
I don't have the page. Okay, sorry. Keep going.
On August 6th, we have Rock Nation. Mr. Ward's going to be fighting Mr. Brand at the Oracle Arena in Oakland. We have a resurrection event on August 19th. I will say we just got a permit for, I believe it's the August the 11th for Combat is America. That's downtown LA. If any of you, the commissioners, can make that event, that event's, that event is well received. It's the 11th. It's not on your calendar. I got the permit late last night, but I did want to mention it. Combat is America is returning to California. It's going to be in downtown LA.
August 11th.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. You'll send out a revised.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. Yes, sir. So I want to draw your attention to just the weekend of the 25th. You see the 25th and 26th. You see 4 events that are here. We've just received, or going to receive 2 more. So I would encourage, one of those is you're going to have Bellator at the Honda Center. So that's going to be on the Friday. And you're going to have a high-level boxing event following that on the Saturday. So I would recommend that to the commissioners. It's going to be 8:26 and yeah, 8:26 and 8:27. Yeah, Bellator is on 8:26.
you put Business Expo, you meant Honda Center.
No, sir, that's another event.
That's another.
Yes,
that's
sir.
an- okay.
Yeah, I'm pointing this weekend just to show that we're going to have 6 events that particular weekend, Bellator is going to be at the Honda Center.
So Friday is Bellator.
Yep.
Honda Center. Saturday is
It's going to be a high-level boxing event
where?
at the Honda Center.
At the Honda Center. So you can get an overnight at the Honda Center. And then Sunday.
I don't think we're going to have anything on Sunday.
Okay, so it's Friday and Saturday.
Yes, sir, and Roy's event's on Thursday.
Residents on Thursday. Also at Fairgrounds. Orange County Fairgrounds.
You have to go to that one. Two boys event on Thursday.
Yeah. And then the commissioners can continue to look at their September schedule, and there's some events on there that the commissioners will probably want to attend, but I won't mention publicly until they make the announcement. And then, I had to take this event schedule off the website. And then September 24th at the StubHub Center, ALA Promotions that just had the excellent event in San Mateo this past weekend is returning to California with a high-level event. And it will be broadcast on Filipino TV. I just didn't know the network, what it's called. So, sir, that's kind of, certainly you have the schedule, or at least the schedule as of 10 days ago. But those are some events. Certainly the commissioners come to any event, but those are some events that I'd recommend to the commission.
Great. I asked Andy to include that as a recurring update to allow us to focus and ask questions about events. Of course, to let the public know as they focus on our meetings and our meeting materials about all these events. Not only that are wonderful to go to, but how great a job we do as a commission regulating these events. So thank you, Andy. Does that conclude your executive officer report?
Well, almost, sir. Just one more thing on the event schedule. Just wanted to remind the commissioner we have the Association of Boxing Commissions annual conference coming up. That's July 30th to August 3rd. And we have the Association of Ringside Physicians July 30th to the 31st. The association, both associations have asked me to present at these, so I will be representing the commission at these two events.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Foster on his report? Is there any public comment expected? There's no action item. Okay. Okay, why don't we move on to agenda item number 6, our subcommittee updates. So we have our large event promotion. You want a restroom break? Okay. Can we take 5, folks? Okay. Why don't we open ourselves back up here, reconvene, and we are on agenda item number 6, subcommittee updates. Let's start with large event promotion. Commissioner Shen Arquidez. Commissioner Sauter is not here. So Commissioner Shen Arquidez, are you ready to provide an update? Thank you.
So, as we reported last time, we are continuing to explore ways to bring promoters, to entice promoters to bring the large events to California. We continue, of course, to compete against the states that have no personal income tax. However, we do have a state with the most venues, and we are, of course, the boxing capital of the world. So we approach our subcommittee's agenda in several ways. One of the things we have done is we have gone to the larger venues, the venues that we historically have had boxing and MMA events at, but also the larger venues like the Rose Bowl, the Anaheim Angels Arena, Dodger Stadium, ones that have 20,000 capacity and more. And we're putting together a brochure so that we can present the promoters with a brochure with some basic statistics, pictures, and contact information. And then I noticed in some media articles, a company called ComScore that put together statistics after the Pacquiao-Mayweather fight. And I approached them and asked them for to put together some statistics on California. And they agreed to do this free of charge, as long as they were able to also use it for their marketing purposes. So one of these is in your packet, and if you will follow me along, I'll walk you through these numbers. So this was sort of in anticipation of a Canelo Triple G fight, which, if all goes well, will hopefully happen sometime next year. So the question was, what is on any given potential Canelo versus Triple G fight, what is the Hispanic viewership, California versus Texas? So if you look at your first column, this is the total Hispanic households, and you'll see it's almost 5.5 million. If you follow that across, that would be Los Angeles. So if you look at Canelo versus Trout, which is 1, 2, 3, that's the first fight that you're looking at. The showtime, so that's showtime. That's 0.4. So that's about half of the viewership. So if you're looking at Los Angeles, the total viewership in Los Angeles, the Hispanic, is about 2 million. If you add up Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, you're looking at about 1.77 million, which is actually less than just the Hispanic viewership in Los Angeles alone. And then if you add up San Francisco and Sacramento, that's another about 900,000. So clearly California has a much larger Hispanic viewership than Texas. I had them put in, well, they put in a couple of other non Triple G Canelo fights. So if you follow it across, there's Triple G versus Gailey, Triple G versus Rubio. So if you look at these viewerships, 100 is about average. So that'll give you the total viewership. So if you look at these, clearly on any given fight, you're looking at a massive viewership in the state of California. So when we approach a promoter, this is something that we would like for them to see. One thing that we didn't put in your packet and that I would also tell a promoter is the state tax, the promoter tax and the gate tax and the TV tax that California has versus some of the other states that we compete against. So for example, in California, as you know, we have a 5% ticket tax with a $100,000 cap. The broadcast pay-per-view tax is 5% with a $35,000 cap. So on a sample $7 million, for example, gate, this would amount to about $135,000 that a promoter would pay. In Nevada, the law changed last year to 8% with no cap. So a sample $7 million gate, a promoter would be paying $560,000. In New York, they changed their law to 8.5% with no cap for ticket. The broadcast pay-per-view tax is 3% with a $50,000 cap. That's $645,000. However, they now amended their law, and I think this is because MMA is now permitted. Professional MMA is now permitted. Amateur has always been permitted in New York, and I think the first UFC is going to happen November 12th. They now have this new law which requires for additional insurance or a financial guarantee of $1 million on each fighter to cover medical, surgical, or hospital care for the treatment of life-threatening brain injuries, which is basically cost prohibitive. So far, there's only really one promoter which has been able to afford having boxing there. In Texas, the ticket tax is 3% with no cap, and the broadcast pay-per-view tax is the lesser of 3% or $30,000. So on a $7 million sample, that would be $240,000. So still, California is the most reasonable. The other thing ComScore prepared for me, which this is, and I didn't distribute this because this is really just an estimate. It is not final, and this is based on the boxes. And just the boxes of the last Canelo fight, and it's not the final. Because I don't know if the commissioners know, what happens with pay-per-view is, generally speaking, pay-per-view pays when pay-per-view gets paid. So, for example, if you have a contract with pay-per-view will keep 50% of whatever they get. And then the promoter fighter gets the other 50%. But when pay-per-view collects, then they will pay. So if they get paid 30, 60 days when the customer pays, then they will pay the promoter. Sometimes the accounts receivables takes 6 months. So generally speaking, a fighter is not going to wait 6 months to get paid. So the promoter may work out a deal to get an advance payment from, let's say, the HBO or whatever, and then pay the fighter. So these numbers are based on what the box hits are. Sometimes people will buy but never watch. Sometimes there's a problem. So these are estimates. And this is from the last Canelo fight. What was interesting about this is that 32% of the viewership came from California, which is huge market share. So anyways, so that's also very interesting. So those are things that we would hope to tell the promoters in bringing these large events to California. Of course, we also need to work on incentives for them to kind of equalize the playing field in terms of the personal taxes. In this regard, we are also planning on working with some of the other governmental entities, like the cities, the counties. Maybe some of the marketing can come from like the bus stops and the buses and things like that. Also, in terms of the large event subcommittee, we are, as we said last time, and as Commissioner Van Gordon-Sauter suggested, the whole branding of CSAC has helped, and we continue to work on that. So one of the things that we have worked on is putting together promoters with potential investors so they can have sponsors, and we have done that. Another thing is getting our name out there internationally, nationally. One thing that we have done is next year we're planning an international conference on also neurological issues, and I think I'm gonna let Dr. Williams talk about that. This is in conjunction with the Vatican Foundation for Culture and also STEM for Life. We had our first programming meeting here in Los Angeles.
Right. So that briefly, that effort is one that I think is going to be, potentially really exciting and I think beneficial for the commission. So the STEM for Life is a foundation that has had 3 separate international conferences in Vatican City on various topics or subjects related to stem cell research and improving quality of life and what have you. And Martha suggested that I speak with the CEO of STEM for Life about a subsequent conference, a 4th international conference, hopefully 2017, perhaps 2018, but the topic would be traumatic brain injury and focusing on the potential for things like stem cell research, stem cell treatments, and then other potential treatments for traumatic brain injury to be highlighted in that conference. I had already been working with Cedars-Sinai Hospital has a regenerative medicine institute on a similar conference locally here in Los Angeles. And so the concept was that perhaps we could combine the efforts, have kind of sister conferences, one nationally, one internationally, and highlight some of the work being done for traumatic brain injury. And one of the ways to, I think, make the whole effort more successful is to really leverage the social capital of sports in that arena. So obviously things like chronic traumatic encephalopathy and what the NFL is faced with, Parkinson's pugilistica, CTE, and boxing and combat sports is a way to really shine a light on and gain a lot of publicity as well as interest and what have you. So we thought that this would be a worthwhile effort. And so we had an initial meeting, as Martha mentioned, a few weeks ago, and that's something that we'll continue to push forward, but obviously continue to update and inform the commission about in terms of where things are with that.
Thank you. Thank you, folks. Any questions for the subcommittee members, or Mr. Foster, do you have anything to add to the March
Also,
event?
another thing, we have established the California Belt. It's up and running. If you go to Box Rec, they have put up, they've done the algorithm and everything. So if you go to Box Rec, there is now a last column that that has the number of true rounds that the fighters have. Some of these, I can pass this sheet to it's kind of show and tell. So the maximum rounds that the fighters have fought, some of the ways, obviously, there are less than others, but so for anybody who wants to match them up, they can, and we are actually working on designing an actual belt with a California seal on it, and that will be approved very soon. So I'm going to pass
Approved
this
by whom?
By Andy, probably.
You might
And
have to
the
bring
chairman.
that to the commission, yeah. Well, or the commission, yeah.
Well, I don't, whoever you want. But yeah, so this is the last column. So anybody who would like to any promoter who wants to have fighters fight the California Belt now can. So I think, and then one other thing, no, I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Ayala, you had a question?
Yeah, I had a question about the large events promotion subcommittee. I thought that the information that Commissioner Shanrukidas shared just now in terms of percentages and all that was great, but I'd love to be able to see that all charted out where we could compare it to other states. I know that in the past, talking to Andy, between Texas, New York, Nevada, and California, we kind of share the sort of the grunt of the event, the large events. It'd be great to see those kind of on a side by side, comparing that state tax that the commissioner talked about, the TV tax, etc. But it would be great to be able to walk in with a one sheeter and talk to some of our local electeds, our state senators that have a little bit of oversight sometimes over these venues or what have you. Like I had a meeting with the president of the Senate, Kevin DeLeon, last week, but I didn't have enough meat to be able to give him to make a pitch for maybe a Canelo Triple G fight or other kind of fight in LA County. Our current speaker and our current president of the Senate are both from LA County. Be great to be able to make a pitch for LA County. Obviously, economic development, the revenue sources that would come as a consequence of that would be amazing, and I'm sure that's something that we could make a pitch for in terms of our local electeds. The other question, which doesn't have to be answered right now, but I thought I read somewhere in the paper, is that sometimes the disincentive for fighters with big purses here in California is the income tax off their purse, as opposed to, let's say, Texas, which has very low taxes. I'm kind of I don't have a lot of information on that. All that information would be great to have when having these discussions with even the folks that appointed us to the commission or what have you, but all kind of in a 1 or 2 pager, so that a 5th grader can talk about this and advocate for this, right? Because that's my grade level.
You said that before I did. Thank you, Commissioner. Okay. I have, I have asked and been talking to Andy, and perhaps he can give us an update on such a, and Commissioner Martha mentioned it, a one-sheeter, a brochure, whatever it is, something simple that highlights the benefits of California, because, of course, who is our audience? Promoters, fighters, in addition to folks like the Senate President, Speaker, and Supervisor Mark Ridley Thomas, who Commissioner Frierson has a relationship with, to help perhaps the folks that run these event locations to be aware of what we're attempting to do here. Because this issue is something that is sort of a conundrum for the Commission. It challenges us, it occupies us, but we don't really have a lot that we can practically do. We certainly can't offer incentives and things like that. That would not be appropriate. But one thing that I know that we do is we have developed and operate the best commission in the United States, probably in the world, and that is evidenced by the number of large events that we are getting, which seem to be increasing, backed up by the budget numbers. So are you going to help us get, we talked about Visit California, the bureau that promotes the state of California, some marketing materials, if you will, promotional materials, outreach materials.
Yeah, yes, sir. Like you and I were speaking about earlier, I have the brochure draft 3/4 done. You will have the finished product at the next commission meeting.
Can I mean, I already have those sheets with all of the percentages and things like that. We have those. That's not that hard to get to you. I also disagree with the fact that we can't provide them with incentives, but we can certainly put them together with people who can, and we have been doing that. I mean, I've certainly been doing that. We can think outside of the box. We have been thinking outside of the box. There are things that we can do for them. And we need to do that, because if we are going to bring those large events here, we have to provide other ways. I mean, this is the subject of a much longer discussion, and this is the subject of maybe a breakout session that we need to have, because the dynamics of how we do this need to change. And we have to think in a much more kind of economic way, because there are ways to do this. But like I said, this is a subject of something that will take a couple of hours to talk about.
So will you provide those promotional materials information to Andy so we can all look at it?
Yes.
Okay.
However, it's always going to come back to that question: how is it that we're going to do this? And there is an end play to this. So with all of that said and all of that promotional material, there has to be an understanding of how you play that end. So like I said, I think that we should have a sit down, all of us, where we have a breakout session and have that discussion, or none of that is going to make sense.
Well, the subcommittee is formed. You can meet. You can invite anybody to a session. You can make it a public meeting. So whatever you think. Obviously, we've done an enormous amount of work, I know, and just want to make it clear what are realistic expectations and what is practical for this commission to engage itself in and occupy our time and resources. So thank you. Let's keep moving. We have the next subcommittee update is officials training. Commissioners Shenarkitas and Ayala, who would like to give us an update? Mr. Foster.
I can start on this one. Just briefly, we're looking at contracting with sports board for evaluation purposes of the referees and the officials. Before I go into that too much, sir, I just wanted to point out to you that we do have an official, our newest official, a newest licensee is here. Mr. Peter Polos from Orange County. He applied. I looked at his resume. He has 6 years of experience judging with camo. And it's a customary in camo that when they're newly appointed, they meet. So he came to just meet the commissioners.
Welcome. Thanks for coming, Judge. Do you have anything you want to say? Yes, come on.
I'd like to say good afternoon.
You have to come up to the mic and introduce yourself, please. I called him judge because he is actually a judge.
Good morning, Commissioner. Good morning, Commissioners. I wanted to introduce myself personally. I'm Peter Polos, and I've recently been issued a license to judge MMA in California, and I really wanted to thank you for that opportunity to do that. By way of brief background, I was a Superior Court judge in Orange County for almost a decade, and now I work full-time consulting with a law firm, but I do this because I have an absolute love and passion for MMA. I've had it since I was first exposed to it, on I don't even know if it was ESPN then when they had K1 or something. I don't remember what it was called, but I've loved it since then, and I've really taken it on as a passion. So I've had the opportunity with JT to work with Camo for 6 years and go through the command course, John McCarthy's command course, which was quite challenging for someone who hadn't rolled around on the mat very much. So again, I wanted to thank you, and if you had any questions for me, I'd love to answer them, and I wanted to let you know that you'll be well represented at any of these events that I'm to, because I take my job very, very seriously in being a judge.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for coming. Look forward to seeing you out there. And try not to screw up.
I'll do my best.
Okay. Or we'll bring you back.
May I?
Yes,
Briefly,
introduce yourself
JT
again.
with Camo, JT Steel. Just wanted to voice our support for Peter. He has been a veteran at Camo. His professional background and his experience with Camo make him a very unique official. I just wanted to provide our word of support for Peter. He will serve you very well, be an asset for you in many ways.
Thanks. Thank you, JT. Anything more on
No, sir. I
training?
just we're looking to contract with the sports board. I'll keep you posted on that. The pod index reports are back in. I don't have that update for the commissioners. Commissioner Senior-Quidez and I are still delving through the data. That it was a lot of data that came in. But in summary, at 30,000 feet, what I can tell this commission is that program has been not just successful, but enormously successful. Officials throughout the entire state have been using that tool week in, week out. We actually had one official who scored 1,490 rounds. 1,690 rounds. That they're really using the tool. So I thought you would be pleased with that report. And just the next ABC's officials training will be at the conference in Las Vegas.
Commissioners, Martha?
I just wanted to, on sports board, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a background on it as Andy prepares to report on that. So it's a very interesting program. I think the NBA uses it, Major League Baseball uses it, women's soccer uses it. It's a very interactive way to evaluate the officials. And so they asked us, and I came up with a bunch of metrics for evaluation. Because the one thing that the POD index doesn't have is it isn't able to tell us how difficult each round was that they're judging. And so I sort of printed these. You can take a look at these. These are the general tabs that you can select. And then you can toggle down to each one of these. I'll just pass these around because we couldn't put them up today. And then as you toggle down each one of these, so you can see, so general, for example, this would be general. As you can toggle down, you can select 1 through 10. So this would be general. This would be general. See that? And you can judge them 1 through 10. And the one thing you can actually also do is, I just did print shots of all of these. You can actually select like a pool of 1 through 5. So I did senior. So this guy could be like in the pool of number 1 or number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5 referees. You can actually even take like a photo or video of him and sync it up so that everybody can see. So I'll just pass these around. It's just very simple, but you can actually do any kind of metrics for them. So all of these you can do 1 through 10, and it's complicated and it's very simple all at the same time, but it gives you a very round and full view of each official. Anyway, just evaluating that.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for all this great work. My humble opinion, I think that work that you guys have done on stuff like this goes more to attracting large events than perhaps anything else we've done. Item 6C is an update on our pension fund subcommittee. This one is for Commissioners Lehman and Ayala. I know Commissioner Lehman could not be here today because she is ill. But I think Commissioner Ayala and Andy have some updates for us.
Sir, this is one where Commissioner Vice Chairman Mary Lehman and Commissioner Luis Ayala and I had a conference call, and we developed an action plan. That was probably maybe an hour-long conference call, and we developed about 12 or 13 points of things that we wanted, based on the last commission meeting, to get the word out for the pension fund. I can come back and report to this commission today that several of these steps have been taken. A press release in English and Spanish was issued by the press office. Commissioner Ayala did actually an interview with NBC Universo regarding the retired boxers pension program. I did an interview with a Spanish-speaking radio station in San Francisco about the program. I got with Elizabeth Reyes, who actually Chairman Carvelli introduced me to down in San Diego, and we had we had lunch with her, and we developed that relationship with Cleto Reyes. And I've sent her some brochures, and now she's shipping gloves with their information.
Great.
We've got the new brochures. I think you guys have got a copy of the new brochures that we just got printed. They're English on one side, Spanish on the back, for the pension. We've reached out to the Division of Investigations, and we've provided them a list of retired boxers we're searching with. The Division of Investigations is the DCA's investigative arm. They perform the investigations. And we're researching, contracting with a private investigator to help us locate additional boxers. So I guess in summary, the report is that this is something that Commissioner Ayala, Commissioner Mary Lehman, and I have actually been working and actively engaged in since the last meeting, and it's very evident based on the numbers that came back. We've saw progress.
I think it's great. And congratulations on all this. With this short amount of time, you've made so much improvement.
Yeah. Andy, I was just talking to Ray Corona before he left, and he mentioned that it'd be great to get some of these out to the gyms. I think, and that's part of that's one of the points as part of our plan, is to get these out at kind of a grassroots effort to deliver these to the most frequently visited places, potentially by boxers or retired boxers, which would be the local gyms and that kind of thing. So if we can get I don't know if you can communicate with him and get some of this some of these flyers out to him. He said he'd be willing to deliver them personally at some of the local gyms, and maybe like him, we can get others to do the same thing.
Perfect. I'll work on that.
All right.
Get back.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions about item number 6 on the subcommittees? Perhaps we can move to item number 7 now. The discussion regarding kickboxing regulations. Mr. Foster.
Mr. Chairman, this is set this up. This is really just an opening discussion for the public and for our kickboxing regulations could use an update. It's been many years since they've been updated. So I think this is important just to provide the public with the notice that the commission may be beginning to have this discussion. Commissioner Senior Quidez and I have been speaking about this actually for several months. She's reached out to Corey Schaefer of ISKA and had a discussion with him. And she came up with, again, no language to vote on, it's just language to actually just to look at for the public, just to view. It's just some proposed uniform kickboxing rules here in the packet, was provided in the meeting materials, and it's just basically just really for just early stages of looking at it.
Okay, I think we get it. Tell us about the process. What happens next? What do you propose to do?
Sir, what I would recommend is that you direct the commission, direct me and Commissioner Senior Quidez continue working on this, get stakeholder input, and then maybe not the next meeting, perhaps the next meeting, but maybe in 2 meetings, bring back a document that the commissioners could actually consider at that point.
Great. So directed. I don't think that if you don't utilize Commissioner Martha on this, that you're a fool.
Yeah.
She and her family are experts on this. I don't know why my slides don't work. Okay. So thanks again, Commissioner Martha. Thank you. So this is great. I don't know if anyone wants to add something to the discussion at this point, but this is a great way to start so we can see what we're looking at, and we look forward to more information in the next meetings. Anyone? Yes, John Frank. Introduce yourself again.
John Frank from the United States Fight League. Yeah, one thing I would propose, if you can consider, is the ability to hold kickboxing in cages. That might give the opportunity to have some joint matches, as far as at the amateur level with pancreation. I think some other states may allow that now. That's it.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Anybody else? Okay. That's item number 6. We can get through perhaps these next 2 items relatively quickly, then we'll break for lunch, and then we can go back to item number 1. I think our folks are here. So item number 8 is review and approval of proposed regulations to adopt Section 610, Division 2 of Title 4 of the California Code of Regulations, Headgear. Mr. Foster.
Mr. Chairman, this is a this came from a request from the Office of Administrative Law. They went ahead and approved the emergency headgear regulation, but requested that the commission be a bit more specific on the headgear itself. Mr. Duke worked with various stakeholders, and actually with Commissioner Mary, I believe she was aware of this. And they came up with 4C. Mr. Duke wrote, all approved headgear shall meet the construction specifications approved by United States Amateur Boxing, USA Boxing, or an equivalent organization. And I think that's the key word there, or an equivalent organization.
After the commission discusses the added language, which is 4C, public comment should be made, and then there will have to be a motion to approve it and to commence the regular rulemaking process. And I'll assist with the motions.
So we need a motion. Will you assist us with that motion?
Absolutely. I recommend that someone make a motion to approve the language and direct staff to commence the regular rulemaking process and authorize the EO to make any non-substantive changes to the approved language and set the matter for a hearing.
I make that motion.
Commissioner Shanarkita has made the motion. Do we have a second?
Second the motion.
Commissioner Ayala made second. So commission discussion on the motion. We invite any public comment on this headgear regulation on this motion. Seeing none, seeing no further discussion, we'll call for the vote. Mr. Foster.
Chairman Carvelli?
Aye.
Commissioner Frierson? Aye. Commissioner Dr. Williams?
Aye.
Commissioner Senior Quidez?
Aye.
Commissioner Ayala?
Aye.
5-0.
Thank you. So approved. Is that it, Mr. Walker? Just that one motion on this item? Okay. Are we moving on to agenda item number 9, Mr. Foster? We ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Agenda item number 9, discussion and possible action regarding formal comment on Assembly Bill 2007, sponsored by Senator McCarthy. This bill would require youth sports, including youth full contact sports, to cease sporting activity and notify parents of any suspected concussions and require concussion education for participants. It also requires medical clearance before return to competition is authorized. Commissioners, I talked with Andy when we became aware of this bill and asked him to put this on our agenda to see if perhaps we could inform ourselves and then perhaps have a motion to direct Mr. Foster to throw the commission's support behind this. What appears to be a very positive and great step forward. So that's why this is on here. Mr. Foster, do you want to add anything to that? You know, the status of the bill and some of the bill sponsors or endorsements?
Yes, sir. I mean, the California PTA supports this bill. The American Medical Society for Sports Medicine, the Brain Injury Association of California, California Nurses Association, Child Abuse Prevention Center, California Athletic Trainers Association. There's been no opposition received.
There is a bill summary. Thank you, sir. There's a bill summary on AB 2007, the back of your packet. You can see comes out of Senator Hernandez committee. On the Senate side, it is likely to end up, I am told, in the governor's office. And so in the event that this does make it all the way, and I know, Mr. Foster, you've been asked where we stand on this. Is that correct?
I was asked to comment on one of the definitions, but certainly been having a couple conversations with one of the consultants that's running this bill.
Okay, so I'm going to ask for a motion before we get to discussion, Dr. Williams, to authorize Mr. Foster to, if appropriate, support this bill. Can I have such a motion?
So move.
We have a motion by Commissioner Shinner-Keys. We have a second. Second by Commissioner Frierson. Discussion, Dr. Williams.
Yeah, I've got a number of concerns, and the overarching principle is that I think it's a good idea to safeguard against head injury in recreational sports, amateur sports that occur outside of schools. And I think that's the main goal. The problem I have is one of the potential for unintended consequences, and it has to do with a number of things. One would be how concussion is even defined, and this has specific relevance for combat sports. So, for instance, there is some debate in the medical community, literature, and so on and so forth in terms of what actually constitutes a concussion in a sport like football or baseball or anything like that, where the main goal of the sport is not to create and execute some kind of head injury. I think it becomes even more problematic when we're talking about sports like combat sports. You could arguably state that anytime someone took a blow and anything happened that changed their mental status or neurologic function, even momentarily, then the fight stops, according to this. The event is over. And I think that runs in it's contrary to the spirit of combat sports. I mean, a knockout is one thing, but I don't know how you would possibly enforce and enact this, stating that anytime a concussion is suspected, play stops. It is completely in contrast to what combat sports are about. That's one thing. The other thing, one of the other things, there are several other potential issues or comments that I would like to propose. One has to do with the fact that I know in terms of how concussion is evaluated, managed, discussed in the media, in the medical literature, or what have you, normally ignores the very important issue of differences in socioeconomic status and underserved populations when it comes to concussion. The concept is as if it's an even and level playing field, and nothing could be further from the truth. So if you're playing water polo, or if you're an equestrian, if you're playing lacrosse, and in many cases, if you're playing a number of the other sports on this list, you likely have access to good medical care. You likely have access to individuals who are on the sideline or part of your club or community or what have you, who can advise you and or your parents or what have you related to concussion. That's certainly not the case when we talk about things like football in the inner city. LA 84 does a great job at trying to educate coaches, but the reality is most of the coaches on the high school level in the inner city are volunteers. They don't have degrees in kinesiology and movement sports and so on and so forth, and they don't have a medical background, so it's very difficult to require that a coach make medical decisions or even recognize medical signs and symptoms. Trainers should. Trainers are available, but not even that's not available in the inner city. I'm talking about football, let alone something like boxing or mixed martial arts, where we know there are significant variabilities and there's a significant unevenness with respect to the ability to just assume there's going to be someone who can enact these kinds of regulations. So those are some of the things that I have questions and concerns about. We talk about the informational sheets, and yeah, they do list the CDC and some of those kinds of resources with respect to information and education, but it doesn't require that. So who creates the informational sheets and who vets that information? Concussion and head injury is a rapidly evolving science. Things change from month to month, let alone year to year. A good example would be, me, myself included, would preach the requirement, the necessity to rest the brain until all symptoms resolve as part of a treatment for a concussion. Now, that's been called into question. And we know that, yeah, you may need to rest for 1 or 2 days, but there's actually improved outcome if you start to activate and exercise people as soon as possible. So this is a rapidly evolving and rapidly changing science. And while I understand the rationale for legislation, I'm really uncomfortable with legislating medical evaluation and assessments. And not to mention the fact that if and when this happens, and I wouldn't be surprised if it does, just because of all of the momentum associated with concussion and head injury. But I think one of the comments made, a concern was who, if they're really aware of the responsibility that they undertake if they participate, who would willingly assume the risk associated with coaching or training an athlete, because this says that you're liable. If this isn't taken into account and someone has had to take the responsibility of ensuring that education occurs and that an event stops if a concussion is suspected, that's huge. So I got a number of concerns.
And yes, sir. Commissioner Farson.
One question. Is that sure? Just one question. Is that when they're playing football, high school, this thing, do they have a consent form or something like that you have to sign? What is that about?
Yeah, you do, even right now, if you play school sports, high school sports, what have you, you do have to sign a concussion information sheet. You know, but then you get into the issue of whether people really understand the contents of that sheet and respect the contents of that sheet or what have you. But yeah, that's required for school participation at this point. You can make the argument, again, that rather than putting the onus on parents and coaches, that there should be trainers associated with people who have some medical background or training background present to help identify the potential for injury and make appropriate recommendations regarding stopping play and when they can return and what have you.
Commissioner Martha?
Do they have doctors at high school football games?
Well, it depends on where the game is. So, one of the foundations I belong to is called the Team Hill Foundation, and we provide certified athletic trainers for 5 LAUSD schools. There's another foundation that provides athletic trainers for a few others. The overwhelming majority of schools in LAUSD don't have a trainer on staff, let alone a team physician. So, you've got coaches wearing 2 or 3 different hats, and it's far from an ideal situation.
Because I'm a little bit less worried about boxing and MMA because we do require physicians, and those are trained by like USA Boxing, and even in amateur MMA, more often than not, they're the same doctors that we use, and they are certified. And but you're right, there are sports where they don't have doctors. I am more worried about the suspected of sustaining. That I'm more worried about.
Where is that in this bill summary?
So if you look at, even at the very beginning, if you look at existing law.
Oh, yeah.
Right,
1A.
And then this bill, 1A.
Yeah.
So that I'm a little bit more worried about. So if you have a doctor on staff or, at the event, that makes me less worried. If you don't, then that becomes much more nebulous.
Right.
Even if you have a doctor on staff, can our ringside physicians or doctors on staff be empowered with stopping a contest if they suspect a concussion. That's the, I mean,
Well, let me suggest this to you, and Commissioner Ayala, do you have anything you want to add at this point?
I do, but let me hear your suggestion.
So this is great. This warms my heart to see, because I know that we have folks like you all here with this expertise. This commission should have a voice. So I want us to comment. I want us to get involved in this process, and we have a chance to. So that's what this is all about. So great. And then what I think the way perhaps we do this is to organize the things that we're talking about here, get them to Andy so he can get them into the process. And we'll have a chance still in the legislature, and then when it goes to the administration, to continue to comment and provide expert input from this commission on these things. So this is great. Yes, sir.
What the commission can do is take a support if amended position, and in the support letter you would indicate what those things are that you want to be amended out.
Great. So let's get to a motion in a second. Let's let Commissioner Ayala.
Before we take that step where we do support if amended or anything like that, I would suggest that maybe some of the questions that have been asked here today, which I think are very good questions, ought to be asked. Obviously, this is a summary of the bill, but maybe working with the author or the staff or what have you, we could put together a list of questions that we have without saying, shoot, your bill stinks, and say here are the questions, answer the questions, and we may be misinterpreting all this, maybe not. I coach at the YMCA level, basketball, as well as AYSO, which is soccer, and I know for a fact that you have to get training. So because just to be clear, we're not talking about schools, because obviously those are already included and into law. We're talking about any organization that is not a school, essentially, right? So like the YMCA, the youth soccer or American Youth Soccer Organization, etc., is what kind of hits me. And obviously all of these mixed martial arts and boxing organizations, whether they're nonprofit or for-profit, is based on what I'm interpreting here. Many of these organizations already have liability insurance, which would cover anything like this. So again, I'm having trouble interpreting exactly what this bill is aiming to do, because some have liability. They all have to have liability insurance in case something happens to a kid, whether it be concussion or otherwise. So I'm unclear on that aspect of the bill. The other one is again the creation of this incentive for people like myself to volunteer and coach. Is it really going to be a disincentive by adding this? I know that I've coached soccer for the last 5-6 years, and every year I've got to do a concussion training. I'm no expert in concussion and identifying a concussion, but there's like at least 3 or 4 steps you have to take to identify a kid that's either has a concussion or is dehydrated or what have you. And it's usually simple symptoms like, does the kid look dizzy? Does he know where? You ask questions like, do you know where you're at? Do you remember your name? Those kinds of things. Again, it's not within my scope of a profession. I'm not a physician, not anywhere near a physician, but there's simple little things, and then you kind of have to refer. But then, if we're really taking it to the next level, if you don't ask those questions and something happens to the kid, then you're liable. I'm not sure that that's the intent of this bill. Maybe that's what it ends up being, but I don't think it's the intent. So I think a question like that would be a good question to ask, as opposed to saying, this is the unintended consequence. Maybe just pose it as a question. I think those are two good things to kind of look at and ask from staff or the authors. Like, did you mean to say this? Because this is the way we're reading it.
Right. Last comment regarding that, and then I'll one of the sections requires that return to play be performed in a stepwise fashion. That's great. Everyone agrees with that. No, and that return to play protocol occur over no less than 7 days. That's debatable. That's not evidence based. That's an opinion that was a consensus opinion. It's changing. But here's what I have a real problem with. Under the supervision of a licensed healthcare provider, how's a guy going to, even if you're cleared by me as a physician that says, I think your concussion has resolved, now you should initiate a stepwise return to play. This is saying that has to happen under the supervision of a licensed healthcare provider. Does that guy? I mean,
Yeah,
so
these-
there's a lot of things.
Yeah, these are some big issues. You know, obviously it's here because if you look on page 2, under 2, there it is, full contact martial arts and boxing. So it concerns us. So I'm going to ask the commission though to make a motion so that we can have a voice in this and can comment and participate in this process.
On the floor, which was to support the bill. I believe you made it. You can
All right,
withdraw
we
that
have that.
motion. You wanna-
Can I
As amended.
ask one question before we proceed
Wait,
there?
wait, no. Yeah. I have the text if you want to see it. You don't really need a motion if you're just going to direct Andy to ask the author's office certain questions.
Yeah, I what I'm asking for, and we have that motion because I've already asked and we have it. And ask your question before we.
Attorney, I can't see your name.
Spencer Walker.
Spencer, there you go. So my question is as simple as, can this body even take a position on this bill? You've got governor appointees and you got a state senator appointed and a speaker that take positions on these bills. I'm not sure if it's within our privy to take a position on this bill. We do? Okay.
Yeah, of course we can take positions with that. I'm taking a position. I don't know about you, but you're the guy that has to take the same concussion test every year. That's okay. Look, let me direct you all back to page 3 here. This bill is sailing through committee. It's going to sail through the legislature. It's going to get to the governor. It's got huge support from all the top organizations. But, you know, we're being asked, so we should participate. We should have a voice here. And, of course, we should be able to get Martha the full text and review all this stuff. But I'm going to ask that we have a motion. And do we have to say as amended to direct? There's 2 things that I think we'd like to direct the executive officer to respond to these questions and then to contribute our questions to the process, get some more information for us. And then if we so choose, perhaps you and working with the chair and vice chair, that we could support this legislation as amended and give us that ability to do so perhaps before we meet in December, which is, so we would need at least that from the commission. So that's what I'm asking. So we have a motion for that, is that correct? Is that okay, Martha? And then we have Commissioner Farson, your second is still good? Yes. Okay. So now public comment on this? Seeing none, let's call for the vote then. Mr. Foster. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That's so approved, Randy. You've got some work to do, and you know, like to keep us informed. Hopefully, if you didn't get, particularly from Dr. Williams, all that stuff that he was talking, please do get from him, because I'm sure we can have some influence on this. Absolutely. Oh, was he? Okay. Commissioner Ayala knows McCarty, so we can squeeze him if we need to. In a full chokehold. We're going to break for lunch. Let's call it around 30 minutes. I will invite you to join us for lunch, all of you in the room, right back there. So we'll be back. Hello, there we go. Welcome back. We'll reconvene our July 12 meeting at California State Athletic Commission. We are through agenda item number 9, and we'll go back now to agenda item number 4. I'll invite our guest here to come up to the table. Mr. De La Cruz, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, this item number 4 on our agenda is discussion on appropriate level of executive officer compensation for the Athletic Commission. There is a presentation by the Department of Consumer Affairs, Human Resources, Mr. De La Cruz, you'll meet him in a second, on process for reassessing salary for exempt positions. And then an opportunity to make a recommendation to increase the salary of the executive officer. Now we do everything appropriately in public with full participation and disclosure and transparency, obviously. And this, Mr. De La Cruz, I'm going to turn this over to you in a minute, but this is not necessarily about Andy Foster, although it would be silly to think it's not, of course, what inspired this action. This is about the role of executive officer for this commission. And we put together a memorandum that we all saw in closed session, commissioners, at our last meeting, that with the help of folks from the DCA, including Gary Duke and others, that laid out the unique roles and responsibilities of the executive officer of this state commission. So I guess we can add to that more, but Mr. De La Cruz, for the record, would you introduce yourselves? Are you prepared to give us our briefing? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, members of the commission. My name is Ricardo De La Cruz. I'm the personnel officer for the Department of Consumer Affairs. What I have provided to you and brought additional copies for members of the public that are situated in the back is two comparable charts. One with a comparable chart indicating the exempt level increase for comparable boards within the Department of Consumer Affairs. And lastly, I also brought over the exempt category salary chart. The areas that are highlighted are what are specifically related to the California State Athletic Commission. Going forward, if the commission does wish to go into altering the exempt level increase or increasing it, my recommendation is for the board to highlight the amount of televised events, such as I believe for the remainder of 2016, there's 18 at this point. The revenue that is generated for the state of California, the high consequence of error in regards to the athletes that are under the purview of the California State Athletic Commission. In addition, in my first chart with the comparable boards, we did gather some data in regards to the positions. The state of California and the administration does often look at the position count in terms of how many individuals are under the direct authority of the executive officer. And while most of the positions under the California State Athletic Commission are in a temporary status, there is a high consequence of error and there's a high degree of responsibility that is entrusted into those temporary positions. There's a high consequence of error in terms of athlete safety that is taken into account with that. And so that's why the comparable boards are at a higher level. And our recommendations are to consider exempt levels J, H, and I.
Would you like to get some questions and discussion going,
sure,
sir? And again, thank you for the work you've done. This summary is very helpful. So, commissioners, perhaps maybe we can go down the table here and start asking questions. And go for them. Mr. Walker, do you have anything you want to add at this point?
Not at this point.
Okay. I will add something that Gary Duke and I discussed for the past year. In addition, as Mr. De La Cruz pointed out, about the televised events, the amount of revenue, the consequence of error, the very nature of this responsibility of this job is, of course, health and safety with high risk, is that this executive officer oversees the only other state-sponsored pension fund other than CalPERS. It's CalPERS and the Boxers Pension Fund. So that's something unique and interesting. And then, of course, we have a Nero fund on top of that. And then the role that the executive officer plays in arbitrating legal matters. That's unique, correct, Mr. Walker? Right, and yes.
That is correct. He presides over those hearings.
Right. So there's a lot of things that we're counting on this executive officer to do that come with a lot of not just risk but responsibility, and we could call it maybe some stress and anxiety factors as well. So those maybe top five things were, I think, why folks are willing to obviously look at this matter. So, Commissioners, Martha, you want to start?
Yeah, can I ask a question? Obviously, this high consequence of error is a term of art because it doesn't exist in my world. How do you define that, and how do you quantify or qualify that?
Well, high consequence of error is unique to each specific situation. With regards to the California State Athletic Commission, the high consequence of error can be from whether a sanctioned fight can take place, whether there's something that happens inappropriate, boxers or fighter safety that could be taken into account. So
Hold on, let me stop you there. I'm talking about in terms of HR and how to improve this situation. How does, I guess what I'm asking is, when you consider a high consequence of, like, how do we make that quantification or qualification go up?
So what our role with within the Department of Consumer Affairs is to take that request, to take the justification that the commission brings forward and present it to the administration. We try to add as much as possible. We work collaboratively with the commission in terms of making the request hit all of the points that the administration may be looking for. Unfortunately, the administration does not have a set guideline in terms of what they're looking for in terms of an increase level. But my recommendation is to look back at when was the last time this position was increased, and at least to my initial review, looks like it has not been hasn't been considered since at least at the very least since Mr. Foster took that position. So one of the easiest benchmarks in there is to indicate that the position, the complexities of it have significantly grown even while Mr. Foster has been in this position. My true recommendation in this is that it not be about Mr. Foster, but it be about the position. It be about the actual the duties and responsibilities, how they have grown, and not necessarily how while they have been outstanding under Mr. Foster, but how they have how anybody in that position would be called upon to act in that capacity.
So is each one of these, is each category considered one category of high consequence of error?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And their level of responsibility is significantly higher the further up the alphabet it goes.
I see. Okay, I understand.
So just for a point of clarification, this current executive officer is labeled as an exempt level M. The next higher level would be L, which is an equivalent to a career executive assignment. That's a civil service classification. That's our high level executive. The next level above that would be level K, which is an assistant agency secretary, which is a overreaching executive that oversees several areas within state government. And then it increases in terms of complexity.
Yeah, so you stated that your recommendation would be to consider categories, I think you said H, I, or J?
Correct, and also K and L. Anything within the band of between H and L would be appropriate for the...
And that was based on some of the things you had described in terms of things you recommended we highlight in terms of that consideration. Do the additional areas that Mr. Carvelli brought up in terms of managing the pension fund, Nero fund, legal proceedings, what have you, further weigh in,
Yes.
in that
Correct.
recommendation?
Correct. Anything that sets this executive officer position out from every other executive officer, what makes this commission separate from boards and bureaus or any other entity within state government, anything that makes it unique, really should be indicated in the justification.
Does having to work on the weekends, being available on the weekends for these events, those kinds of things, do those things matter as well?
Unfortunately, when it comes to the executive officer position, regardless of its exempt level, it is understood that that they are called to work above and beyond, and the administration does consider working weekends or long hours customary for that role.
Commissioner Martha, we were going to go down the table. We'll come back. Commissioner Frierson.
Yes. Good afternoon. How you doing?
Very well,
Good.
thank you.
I don't have those kind of questions, but I'll say this. I've been on the commission for 10 years, I think longer than a lot of folks, and I just reappointed until 20, and I'm 86, so that'll mean I'll be 90. Okay, so this is my last hurrah, my last rodeo.
I don't know about that. We'll see.
And I'll say this, that without all the stuff, I go along with your recommendation of H, and I'll tell you why. When I got on this commission, we were in the hole for years and years, in the hole. When Andy, and I have to say I helped get Andy here, he brought us from zero, $23,000 to where we are now. And that's because he really works hard. And sure, we all make mistakes and all that, but he is our number one person. And I'm really proud that he's here, and I know he'll do better. I have to teach him one thing, and that's this, that he's the boss. And I think he forgets that he's the boss, because the boss don't come and put out all these things and carry the water and all that kind of stuff. He has people in his office, and I think he should learn that that's what you do when you're the boss. Okay, thank you.
And actually, just to add to your comment of how it took one extraordinary candidate or one extraordinary incumbent to make a significant change to the board, is that this is a forward-thinking process. This is a forward-thinking movement by this commission to ensure that in the future there will be another Andy, that there will be someone of that caliber, someone of that that will be attracted to this position, someone with those skill sets, someone with those duties and that work ethic that you are looking for, that will help this commission thrive, that will help this commission grow.
Thank you. That's a great point. And I have some individual questions, not as chairman of the meeting, but and Mr. De La Cruz, you pointed this out. We call them temporary positions. So if you add up, and that Andy would be the inspectors, just the inspector category. So you add that plus the authorized positions, which you've not taken advantage of, frankly, all your budgeted authorized positions, correct? So that's 80 there. And then this does not take into account all the other constituents of this commission. Judges, referees, folks that run our delegated entities, and that rolls into a couple hundred people, I believe, that technically report into you. Isn't that correct? And there's an additional 105 officials. So you would add that to the 80. So now we're at 200.
Yes, sir. They're not technically state. They're not state employees, but I mean, we do assign them, and I do teach them and train them, and supervise them.
Right. Right. So there's a lot of folks that are involved that report up to you that you are managing and oversight there. So that's why I think it's important to point out that picture. But thank you again, Mr. De La Cruz, for figuring that out on the front end. Yes, sir.
And this was just taking into account positions that are compensated through the state of California. So if there are other entities in which that Mr. Foster or the executive officer would have direct oversight over or take direction from, those should be indicated in the justification as well.
Okay. And then we also note that there are other, I don't know if this matters, a state-by-state comparison, but that we know that there are other commissions, smaller commissions that have higher levels of compensation, that they're out there.
That is definitely something that should be included in
Right.
terms of what the national landscape looks like.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Ayala?
Yeah, so Commissioner, or Mr. Chairman, you just took my exactly what I was going to ask. But we were just discussing earlier. I think everything's pretty much been said. Obviously, you as the Office of Human Resources with the state have to abide by your process and categorizing all this in order to determine or make these kinds of determinations in terms of salary. But we were just commenting earlier on another topic that between California, Nevada, New York, Texas, we basically put out a lot of big events, and a lot of events overall. And the demand of work is very high in the state, if not the highest, in comparison to the rest of the nation. And so if we are to understanding that this is not about Andy, but it's about the position and recruiting the highest caliber CEO that we can offer for one of the largest states in the nation, at least when it comes to putting out fighting events, then I would go along with Chairman Frierson in making the recommendation that we go with one of your recommendations was level H or category H, so that we can continue. Hopefully Andy's not going to go anywhere anytime soon, but in the event that were to happen, or when it happens, that we can continue recruiting the highest caliber CEOs that we can for this organization.
Commissioner Martha, back to you.
So when I was referring earlier, not so much that he works on the weekends, but our actual events are on the weekends. So he works all week and then works the events. That doesn't count?
That can definitely be accounted for, or it should be indicated in the in the justification, in addition to the national or worldwide exposure that some of these events have, should be also indicated.
Because basically that means he gets no time off.
Correct.
Okay.
So it would be appropriate to, in the justification, to put a snapshot in terms of what the past 2 years, the average work week has looked like, what a typical work week would look like.
Okay. And for example, I think last year we had basically twice the number of events that Nevada had, and yet he gets paid a lot less.
Correct, and that's another thing that should be indicated, is that since the executive officer often attends most of the events, if not all of the events, that because the state of California is so large, that unlike Nevada, which is a rather smaller state in terms of size, that the executive officer has a short amount of time to get between several events.
I think at this point, because I think I've heard it, I think we've all heard that perhaps Commissioner Frierson would like to make that motion. Oh, sorry. Perhaps Commissioner Frierson would like to make that motion that you started to talk about.
Yeah, I'd like to make the motion of that item H. Is it H? Yeah. You said H, yes. The recommendation of you of H.
We have a motion to recommend exempt level H for the position of executive officer. Do we have a second? I think Commissioner Ayala, you
Second that.
We have a second from Commissioner Ayala. So now, any further discussion from the commission before we invite folks from the audience or public to comment? Anyone's welcome to come. Roy, come on up, and Mr. De La Cruz, please stay right there. He can sit next to you. Yeah. Please state your name, sir.
Roy Engelbrecht, fight promoter. I just want to say it's the best money we could spend for the best executive officer we have ever had.
Clear and to the point.
Just kind of a point of information. I understand, having worked for the state in the past, is there a cap as to how much folks can increase per year? I believe there is, right?
Each exempt level has its own embedded cap. So in terms of if the commission does elect to go with exempt level H, the cap for the annual salary for that position would be $122,796.
That's a cap for the lifetime of that position.
Correct.
There's also a cap per year, an increase, I believe, right?
Actually, the commission can recommend a percentage increase on a yearly basis. The administration will take a look and consider that that recommendation and may adjust it based on available funding.
Our funding.
Correct. That and also state funding as well.
Wait a minute. Hold on. So if he gets, or this position gets this salary for the rest of eternity, this is as much as this person will ever make.
It is possible that over time cost of living increases will be factored in. Typically, the state of California will, it's currently in negotiations with a majority of our collective bargaining rank and file employees. Typically, exempt and managerial employees will receive something comparable to the largest employee organization. So, for example, if the unions negotiate a 4% increase, typically what happens is across the board, executive management receives a comparable 4% increase.
Is there, at the next level lower, is there a difference, or are all these levels basically capped out at their levels and it's the same story?
It's the same story.
That just doesn't seem right. They're just capped out, and then what happens if we want to give them an increase after that? We have to go through this whole process again?
Correct.
Oh, brother. How is that even right?
Well, this is a process. So, okay, we have any other opportunity for folks from the public to comment here? Before we call for the vote, Mr. De La Cruz, can you tell us about the next steps in this process?
The next steps would be for the commission to submit a recommendation to the Department of Consumer Affairs, recommending a specific exempt level that the commission is recommending, in addition to any substantiation, any documentation that supports the recommendation. The issues that we've highlighted today, in addition to anything that's been worked on in the past, would be greatly appreciated. What the Department of Consumer Affairs then does is my staff schedule a meeting with the administration to have this these special requests expedited and reviewed. We then follow up and ensure that the administration is reviewing them timely. And as soon as we get notified of it, we immediately pass along the information to the chair.
So thank you. So there's no further action required by the commission other than this recommendation?
Other than to take a vote and to submit a formal recommendation.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Unless there's anything else, Mr. Foster, do you have anything you'd like to say? You don't have to. Okay. Then would you please call the roll for the vote? Aye.
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 By unanimous vote, we have recommended that this position be categorized exempt level H. So this is great. Thank you. This is another great step, I think, forward for our commission. Mr. De La Cruz, thanks again for your assistance. And Spencer, if you'd let Mr. Duke know and your office know also, thank you for assisting us in pulling together all this information. It's been a long process.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, back to, we'll finish up on the agenda. Item number 10. Under Business and Professions Code, Section 18640.5, Commission is required to invite stakeholder testimony at Commission meetings in order to identify actions that may lead to greater opportunities for licensees to participate in major professional boxing contests. So here's another opportunity to perhaps add anything that we may not have already discussed here today with regard to this matter. Anyone? Thank you. Seeing no one, we can get back on to onward to item number 11, which would be any public comment on items not on the agenda. Please come forward and state your name. We welcome any public comment. Seeing none, we can move on to then item number 12, which is the next meeting. Mr. Foster?
We might want to amend this date just a bit.
Yeah, it's about 5 weeks away, so perhaps there may not be an agenda to go over in that period of time. So do you have some recommendations for us?
I was thinking maybe somewhere at the beginning of October or the very end of September.
And then that would not be our year-end Sacramento meeting. That would be December.
It'd be, yeah, right.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Sorry?
What are you saying? I can't hear.
So maybe a meeting in September and then one in around here and then in December in Sacramento. End of September, maybe, folks,
Sure.
commissioners?
Oh, no. I have to go to China. Sorry.
Well, that's one.
Mary-
One for China.
Mary wants San Diego.
We want San Diego, okay.
October, beginning of
So
October.
you get, like what? We don't want to get any further than that because of our December meeting.
I just have to be in China
First week of October.
September 29th. We could do before that. The last weekend, the September 19th, that week.
September, sir. September.
End of September or right at the end, right before the 29th, perhaps.
The week of September 19th is good. Is that good?
Anybody have a problem with the week of September 19th? Okay. Andy, why don't we, what do we typically do? Monday? Tuesday? Does it matter?
It doesn't matter, sir.
Are there any events on the 24th, 23rd or 24th?
Oh, we happen to have
Look at the event
event
calendar.
calendar. Yeah, there is a Citizens Bank. Oh no,
The week of here.
that's the 18th. King of the Cage. Oh, StubHub Center, the 24th. But that's not San Diego.
Well, I don't know about that one, San Diego. We're having a hard time, Martha, getting people to come to LA, let alone San Diego. So
Okay.
let us think about that one.
It's fine with me up here. StubHub Center.
So do you want to try something on a Friday and be around for the event? Does that matter to anybody? Like the 23rd? Would that be okay? Commissioner Frierson, September 23rd is a Friday. Dr. Williams, Martha?
Sure.
Why don't we shoot for that? Let's please reach out to Commissioners Lehman and Souter.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. September 23rd, Friday, September 23rd. Yes, sir. Friday, 23rd. Okay.
How do we know what place we're going to do?
Andy will send something out for us. We'll check in with the other two commissioners and we'll pick a location and we'll go from there. Mr. Foster, do you have anything else before we adjourn?
No, sir. That's all.
Commissioners, Mr. Walker, thank you all. The meeting of July 12th is hereby adjourned. Have a great day.